Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. And welcome to another episode of Glass Half Full, a podcast and a safe platform where we talk with a variety of teachers, entrepreneurs, spiritualists, uplifters, givers, shakers, and serenaders. Everyone has a lesson to learn and a lesson to share. Let's use our life experiences to enrich someone's heart, mind, spirit, and soul. Through sharing our experiences, we can be a learning inspiration for one another. I'm your host, Chris Levins. Let's welcome today's guest. Today's guest is Cory Rosenke. Cory Rosenke is an author, pastor, presenter, and tenacious pursuer of truth. Cory is both the concept pioneer and foremost authority on the cravings of the soul. Through sermon, session, workshop, and manuscript, he is dedicated to the pivotal work of connecting hungry souls to the joy of their maker. In a world where truth and reality have become shrouded in debilitating ambiguity, Cory specializes in reasserting the clarity of divine design and definition. Let's give a warm welcome to Cory Rosenke.
Chris, thank you so much for having me. I very much appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for taking some time out to be a guest here on Glass Half Full. We're happy to have you today.
I'm so delighted to be here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Can you tell everyone where you are in the world and what time it is, please?
Yes, I am at this moment in Sunnyvale, California, which is right between San Jose and San Francisco, and it is 10:34 p.m.
All right, it's the evening. Hey.
I'm sorry, I misspoke. It is 8:34 p.m.
Oh, okay. You added on a couple hours.
Yeah. I'm getting older, so it feels like 10:34 p.m.
It felt like it was a 10, right? It felt that was a 10. I love it. I love it. Well, thank you for taking some time out. We're going to jump right on in. I like to ask all my guests this first question. I believe that our lives are in spiritual design. Can you share your life layout or blueprint with everyone? This is how you grew up, where, your family lifestyle?
Yeah, sure. I grew up in, I guess, what a lot of people would call poverty for a significant season of my life. I grew up in Alberta and British Columbia, Canada. Those are two provinces of Western Canada. And we were quite poor for a season. We were homeless, living in a tent by various lakes in the Rocky Mountains of British Columbia. Grew up in poverty for many, many years. And I was that young boy wandering the mountainside, asking the question of why. I was wondering why things were the way they were, why people made the decisions they made, why my family was different than other families. I actually specifically remember sitting with my dad when the first Iraq War happened, and sitting around the radio and just listening to what was taking place, and inside my young mind asking the question of why. And so my growing up years were really spent asking that question. And I have to say, as I grew up in search of that answer, I delved into philosophy at a very young age. Plato, Aristotle, Confucius, the great philosophers, and trying to find that question of why. Ended up evolving towards psychology. For a while, I was really into Sigmund Freud and his whole thesis on the development of personality and the id and the ego and the superego and all things Freudian, and didn't find my answer there. And then really got excited about neuroscience and the neuroplasticity of the brain, and how our brain will literally change shape due to trauma or self-discipline. It's just a fascinating concept, and the effects of brain chemicals and dopamine and serotonin, and then ultimately ended up in faith. So when I often talk about my faith journey or the blueprint, as you have put it, I would say that philosophy led me to psychology, psychology led me to neuroscience, neuroscience led me to faith, where I believe we find the true answer to our deepest why questions.
I love it. I love it. And so now that you in today's time, how how has that brought you up into today's time? What is it that you are doing with the faith in today's time?
Yeah. Well, as you mentioned, when we started, I'm currently a pastor. Um, and I've written a book called The Magnetic Heart of God, Understanding the Five Cravings of Your Soul, which really has been, as I kind of just mentioned, a lifetime in the process of exploring who we are and why we are and what we are. And in fact, I would say that the questions of why we are and what we are linked together. There's a whole world out there asking, looking for purpose, and yet not certain what it means to be human. And we have to answer that question of humanity first before we can find our true purpose. And so, yeah, I'm on a mission right now, to be frank, Chris, to remind people of all different backgrounds that more than a brain or a body, they are a soul. And that has kind of been my mission right now and I've been blessed to speak to tens of thousands and into millions, in fact, over the past year, on this very topic, just reminding people more than a brain or a body, you are a soul. Something that all of us, for the most part, most of us, I should say, intuitively know, but very few of us have been living that way.
I love that. Can you explain to everybody what is a soul, or what is the purpose of a soul?
Yeah.
I know that's probably a deep question, but
yeah, no. Well, to start with your first one and then move on to the second one there. Yeah. The soul is some of the phrasing, because I speak to a vast array of audiences, Christian audiences, audiences of different faiths, atheists, psychologists, many different people with many different backgrounds and many different worldviews. I often find the simplest way and the way that most people are willing to accept the verbiage of the soul is to say our non-biological selves. That is to say, the part of us that exists beyond biology. And so, as I mentioned, I remind people we are three-part beings: body, mind, and soul. And we live in a world that is obsessed in catering over the needs of the body and the brain. It's our cultural obsessions: the body and the brain, the body and the brain. Meanwhile, our souls are starving to death, the core of who we are, our non-biological selves. And so that's what the soul is. It's that part of us that is non-biological, that exists beyond biology. And as far as what its purpose is I ultimately believe that, when you think of our biological selves, our body, for a moment, we think of the different cravings that we have. We crave food. We will get hungry. Our tummies will growl. And that craving propels us towards actually consuming nutrient. I would think of the craving for thirst, a biological craving. That the intent of that craving is to propel us towards actually drinking water. And just think of this: if I didn't have the craving known as thirst, I would probably forget to drink water. I would get busy doing whatever, and I'd be dead in 4 days, because we can only live for 4 or 5 days without water. So that these cravings within us are for the purpose of driving us towards sustenance. And I believe that our souls also have cravings, and that is one of the purposes of the soul, is inside us. Our soul has these cravings, and these cravings send us out in search of what we really need to be happy and whole, to be human as we were intended to be human. And so not only do we have souls, but these souls within us are not mute and passive. They are not just sitting there, waiting to somehow, jump out and do some sort of dance after we die. No, our souls are the core of who we are right now. The biggest decisions we make in life, those decisions do not come from neurons firing in our brain. They come from a deeper source. The neurons in our brain help get this biological form known as my body to start acting out behaviors. But the actual source call that says this is what you need, that comes from the soul.
All right, now break it down for us. Break it down. Good. So we talked about faith a little bit. Well, you spoke about it earlier. Can you break down what is faith and how has it worked for you?
Yeah. Well, that is a great question, because I believe that when you kind of introduced me, you talked about my passion to bring clarity of both design and definition. And I believe that definition is something that is sorely lost today to us. For an example, words like peace. The whole world is looking for peace, and yet for the most part, it has been left ambiguous. We're looking for peace, but at the end of the day, we don't really know what it is, so we don't really know what we're looking for. I
Mm.
think the same is true of happiness, even love sometimes, and I would say even the word faith that you just mentioned.
Mm.
At the end of the day, I always will often say this, as I'll let the pastor part of me come out. Faith is trust plus surrender. And
Yes, for the surrender.
yeah, and that surrender is often that missing ingredient that many people forget. We'll
Yes.
think of faith as simply trust, but it is actually beyond trust. It is
Mm.
trust plus surrender.
Mm.
And
I
that is
like
something
that.
that's very hard for us. Surrender is what I call the 9-letter dirty word that many of us have been, when we think of surrender, we almost think of it exclusively in a negative sense, right? Like as if
Mm-hmm.
surrendering is something to do with loss. If I surrender, it means I lost. When it comes to issues of faith, when we surrender, we actually win, we actually
Mm.
gain. And of course, the whole point about faith is only as wise and as good as the object upon which our faith is placed. And so faith
Ooh.
is
Mm.
often in that sense a transitive verb, and that is
Mm.
that its value is based on its attached noun. So faith in a bridge may be wise or may be unwise, right? Faith
Mm.
in the pilot of the airplane may be wise or it may be unwise.
Mm.
And ultimately, from my belief, the faith that stands, the faith that lasts, is the faith that is in the only unshakable force, and that is God Himself.
Mm. All right now, Cory, give it to us. I'm ready to take out my church fan. Yes. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Oh, I like it. I
Well,
like it.
I would just say one more thing about that, because faith,
Mm.
oftentimes, again, is kind of a word that is associated with with religion, or like what we call people of faith.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth of the matter is, everybody who
Of
has ever
course.
lived walks by faith.
Mm.
But again, the question is faith in what?
Yes,
And the
exactly.
value of that faith and the power of that faith is really, as I said, it's a transitive verb. It's based on its attached noun. So what is your faith based in? That will ultimately determine whether your faith is good and wise.
Yes, you gave us the map just now. You gave us the map to get there. I love it. Ooh, that was a good breakdown. That was good. That was good. Yes. So, can you give an example of how your faith has been tested?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, I would say my faith has been tested. Our faith, I think, is tested every day.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes, indeed.
I think that we live in a world that has, well, as I mentioned, we live in a world that has forgotten who we are. Just think of this, how we live in a world that has never been this prosperous, has never been this educated, and yet we are more confused than ever. Virtually every study shows that we are more depressed than ever. There is
Mm-hmm.
prevalent anxiety. I would say even that under the surface of most cultures, there is a building rage. And the reason for that is because we have forgotten what it means to be human, which means by default, we are living in delusion. We are living as if the biological is all there is. And living in delusion is a tough place to be. The soul inside of us knows there's a problem, and it's starving and it's raging and it's crying for attention, and we just keep feeding the biological. And so because the world is in this kind of state of naivety and delusion, there is this great state of confusion and contradiction with reality. And so I would say that all of us have a temptation to disassociate with the reality of the spiritual, the reality of there being a God of love and a God of purpose and a God of design. And yet our disillusionment that causes us to live it disconnected with that reality. And so as an example, I'll use this. My maker, your maker, all our maker for that matter, says, I love you with an everlasting love. I place this significance upon you. And so I have a choice. Do I find my significance in that love and in that message, or do I find my significance in my paycheck and in the diploma on my wall? And I think every day in a million scenarios like that, my faith is tested. Will I live in connection with the reality that I know to be true, or with the reality that appeals to just simply my biological nature? And I think there are so many areas in which we could dissect that. But ultimately, I believe we are all tested in our faith by that regard. I think if I could go back to the Garden of Eden, again, speak to your faith audience a little bit and tell the story there. When the serpent approached Eve, he said to her, "Did God really say not to eat from the tree in the garden?" And Eve gave the right answer. She said, "Yeah, God said don't eat it or you will surely die." And the serpent's response was, "You will not certainly die." See, the serpent, or in this case, we could also say this the part within us, within humanity, that seeks to rebel, or in the psychology they call it the fatal fantastic element. There's a part within humanity that just seeks to, you give us something beautiful and we will wreck it. It's just inherent within humanity to do so. And so, but that messaging that says, like the serpent said, did God really say? He caused Eve to question whether she had heard God correctly. And then when she answers and she gave the right answer, then the serpent said, "You shall not." He contradicted the voice that she knew to be true. And I think that my faith has been tested in that way, because that's that same messaging that we hear throughout the world. Did God really say? And then when we answer yes or no, the serpent contradicts what our Maker has told us. And that is where our faith is constantly tested. It's tested in the areas of pride, in the areas, well, you name the area, it is tested.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that. Can I ask you, how can we discover meaning and purpose in our lives?
Yeah, I get that asked that question a lot, Chris, and I often give an answer that kind of surprises a lot of people, and because it's different than most. And I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. We cannot find purpose if we don't know who and what we are. Before we can understand what our purpose is, we have to understand who we are, why we are, and what we are. And for as an example, imagine that a hammer suddenly coming to consciousness and wondering, what am I? Well, someone could explain to it, you were designed and you were made to hammer nails and to pull nails and through those acts to build something beautiful. Well, now if that hammer decides, well, I don't want to do that, I want to be a notebook. Well, it's going to be hard for the hammer to be a notebook because it was made for a very specific purpose. And I think that is also something, because we have forgotten who and what we are, we've forgotten that is also true about ourselves. We have been designed for a great and beautiful purpose. And it's only in coming to awareness of what we are, and which I would say we are more than brains or bodies, but yes, also brains and bodies. But more than that, we are souls created to live in connection with our Maker, and to find our joy and our strength and our purpose, for matter, therein. And so I generally will say, when I'm asked that question of purpose, I will go back one step further and first try to help people understand who and what they are. Because once we understand who and what we are, the question of purpose becomes more obvious.
Nice. I like that breakdown of it. That makes sense. You've been saying a few times, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be human?
Yeah. And that is isn't it interesting? That is the most basic question that we all ought to be asking. And just think of this. We live in a world, a beautiful world, and we can look at all of the other creatures on earth, and as kind of, cognizant people with a prefrontal cortex, we can look around the world and say, oh, you know what? I can see that the purpose of a giraffe, why that long neck? Well, it has that long neck so we can reach the leaves at the top of the tree. Isn't that a beautiful thing? Meanwhile, the deer, they eat the leaves at the lower part of the tree. And then we can say, oh, the purpose of a predator is to thin out the weak and the ill from the herd so that the herd stays strong and it doesn't die from disease. And the purpose of the the ants and the beetle is then to, break down this composing flesh and kind of help bring it back into the soil, so that rich grass can grow once again. We can look at all of creation and say, I know the purpose for all this. I know what this stuff is. And that we ask the question of what it means to be human, and we're at a loss. Isn't that fascinating? How when
It's
it comes,
interesting.
we have such a lack of self-awareness on the most basic level. So I would say again, what it means to be human. And I in this particular case, Chris, I will try to suppress my Canadian impulse to constantly say sorry. But I will once again say the same thing, and that more than a brain or a body, you are a soul. And you are a soul that has been created in the image of God. And what does that mean? Once again, we come to an ambiguous term. And so I can say, as a person of faith, using the phrase, we are created in the image of God, is a phrase that we would say all the time. But once again, very few people know what it means. I can tell you what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean that God has 10 fingers and 10 toes. It doesn't mean that God, pants heavy and loses his breath when he runs up a hill. What it means is that we have been designed to live and to exist and to find our being in connection with our maker.
Mm-hmm.
That is not true of the antelope. That is not true of the eagle.
There's no transcending of that.
we are called to live in connection with our maker. So what it means to be human is to be this glorious three-part being. Yes, intelligent, like I said, a prefrontal cortex, well developed. We are called to walk in creativity and authority and freedom, not just in the biological, but in our souls, because our souls are the core of who we are, and humanity is also designed to live in connection with their maker. Now, if you were to ask people in the world today what it means to be human, that is not the answer you would get. You would probably get the answer, what it means to be human is just to be another animal, only we happen to be the smartest of the animals. And so that is a myth that I am constantly trying to dispel. You are not just another animal. And that is not to degrade animals. Animals are great and wonderful, but you are not just another animal.
Yeah, you're just giving the facts.
Yeah, but we in the world today, in this modern world, the so-called educated world, have somehow convinced ourselves that we are just animals, which is, of course, it comes as no surprise then that we start acting like animals. And so just to kind of bring it back to clarify the question you asked, what it means to be human is to be a three-part being living in synchronicity with itself, body, mind, and soul, connected with the sovereign of the universe.
Well, that's a lovely definition. Nice. Thank you for that. We wanted that breakdown. Excellent. So let me ask you, how do we begin to turn our lives over to Christ? What do you say? What are the first steps that you would recommend for somebody who has no idea about any of this? They don't go to church. They don't know anything about it, but they do feel spiritual. So, sometimes people get the concept of religion and spirituality mixed up, but and feel that there's certain things they have to be doing, but you can be spiritual and, not rolling up at the church. So can you tell us, how do we begin to turn our lives over to Christ?
Yeah. Well, I would say that we can't help but be spiritual, because the core of who we are is spiritual. And I think that, so I would give, as I mentioned, I speak to a wide variety of audiences, Christian and non-Christian. And when I wrote this book, The Magnetic Heart of God, Understanding the 5 Cravings of Your Soul, I started off writing it with the intent to help Christians understand the depth and the glory of our connection with God. That it wasn't simply a sinner-savior relationship, but that in fact our relationship is a creation-creator relationship. And so if I'm talking to an audience, let's say some of your listeners out there aren't familiar with the spiritual, aren't familiar with the concept of Christianity. I would go back for a moment and I would say this thing again. You are a soul made in the image of God. Your soul has cravings. 5 cravings in particular, as I dissect in the book. Every human who has ever lived has been driven and propelled through life and time by these 5 cravings of the soul. They are the root of all human behavior and all human activity. If you want to understand what took place in Rome under the time of the emperors, or what took place, in China, during the time of all their emperors, or if you want to understand the modern day scenario, it all comes back to the same 5 cravings of the soul that transcend all gender and generation and worldview. And so
are you going to give us the 5?
I am. These 5
I'm over here
cravings,
like, are we going to get it? Or are you going to be like, honey, get that book?
Yeah,
I was on the tippy toes over here. Yes.
Yeah. No, so these 5 cravings, and of course I go in great detail in the book. These are the 5 cravings. Security, and it's number 1. And I don't mean these in by way of importance. This is just the order I'm going to give them to you. But honestly, each one is second to none. And I break down the craving for security into two parts. There is the craving for physical security, or what we would call scientifically simply the survival instinct.
Okay.
But the other half of security is relational security. And that is that all of us need to know that our hearts are safe in the hands of those who hold them. And all of us are looking for this security. And we can have everything else that the world has to offer. But if we don't know our hearts are safe in the hands of those who hold them, we are not at peace. In fact, we can be driven to a point of madness. And there have been plenty of examples throughout human history of observing that madness that comes when we do not feel relationally secure. So security, number 1. Number 2, identity. Every human being on earth has the craving for identity. And I often say that the craving for identity asks 4 symbiotic questions. Who am I? Why am I? Do I have value? Do I have purpose? Again, there's no other creature on earth that is asking these questions but humanity. We need to know who we are, why we are, whether we have value, and whether we have purpose. And again, that is true of every gender and every generation. Third craving, security, identity, independence. And again, I break independence down into two sections. The first one being freedom. We all need to know that we have some sense of autonomy, that we have some sense of self-governance. That's why prison itself is a punishment, to be confined, to have that physical freedom taken away. And anytime we have physical freedom taken away, or intellectual freedom taken away, or freedom of speech taken away, the revolt quickly births within us. We have this craving for independence. But then the other half of independence is not just freedom, but we have this desire to realize that we are distinct. We are individuals. We are unique. And as much as perhaps in a social setting, we may find security in being part of a mass, a group of people that, they often say there's security in numbers, right? That cannot come at the expense, of the sense of individuality and personal freedom. So security, identity, independence. Third one, significance. That is, every human being on earth, we all need to know that we aren't just distinct, but we are also special. We are significant. There is something about us that sets us apart, that sets us above. For some people, they need to feel like they have the strongest man in the room. For another person, they just need to know they make the best apple pie or the best chocolate chip cookies, right? Or they have the best hair. Whatever it is, we will all come to something that we hang on to that says, this makes me significant. And we can have all the security in the world. We can know who we are, have our identity. We can have freedom. But if we do not feel that there is something about us that is special, we will not have peace. We will not enjoy happiness. And fifthly is the craving for innocence. And that is to say,
Did you say innocence?
Innocence, that is correct.
Okay.
We all need to know that we are good, that we are not guilty. And this craving is second to none. Just think about this for a moment. Basically, every argument you've ever had or any offense you've ever taken happened because you perceived, correctly or incorrectly, that someone was accusing you of wrongdoing or wrong thinking. And
Mm-hmm.
you can't exist in happiness in a situation like that. You either have to flee, run away, because you can't be around someone who makes you feel guilty,
Mm.
or you have to fight. And that's where I often say the righteousness wars begin, because we don't need to feel totally innocent. We just need to believe. I just need to believe that I'm more innocent than you, Chris. That's kind of that human us, right? And so, and so for those of you who are married, you might recognize this scenario, right? Your spouse comes in and says, "You left your socks on the floor again." And what we should do is say, "Yes, you're right. I shouldn't have done that. I apologize." But generally, what we say is, "Oh yeah, well, you left the bathroom in a mess."
Yep,
Right?
there's a reason. Yes, there's
Right.
a lashback.
Yeah, the fight comes in, right? Because we cannot bear for any length of time this feeling of guilt. It is absolutely, it just destroys us inside. So these are the five cravings:
Mm-hmm.
security, identity, independence, significance, and innocence of our soul. And so you asked the question about coming to Christ. And I know I'm going about this the
No, no, no.
long
You do
way.
you do your way. Take your
Yeah.
time. Go ahead.
My point
This is
is
your time.
this: peace and happiness can only be experienced when these five cravings are satisfied simultaneously. They
Mm.
have to be satisfied at the same time. I can't. So, for an example, I can have the highest walls built around my house, the biggest locks on my door. I can feel secure in that way. I can know who I am. But if someone's making me feel guilty, I'm not at peace. Right? Or I can feel innocent. I can feel righteous. I can feel special and significant. But if I feel threatened by someone, my security is threatened, I'm not at peace.
Mm-hmm.
So peace does not happen if you only have 4 out of the 5 cravings or 3 out of the 5 cravings. All 5 cravings have to be satisfied simultaneously. And I will tell you this: there is nothing on earth that can do that, can satisfy all 5 cravings for any length of time. I mean, maybe
Wow.
for, like I said, we can experience it for moments or seasons, but it'll ultimately fall apart. These are non-biological cravings. Remember, they are cravings of the soul, and they cannot be satisfied in the biological. And so I would say to your people out there, we as humanity have looked to satisfy these cravings in all the wrong places throughout time. And it's always the same places. It tends to be the same places. We look to have them satisfied in money. But the truth is, it's never enough. It's never enough.
Mm-hmm. So
And
true.
as soon as we acquire what we think is enough, we suddenly realize either it's not enough, or we begin to stress and lose our peace because we know that it can be taken away from us. So then we have to scheme how to protect it. So we look to satisfy these cravings in wealth. It doesn't work. We look to satisfy these cravings in control. But once again, it's never enough. In power, it's never enough.
Mm-hmm.
We seek to have those momentary thrills through sex, right? Or through
Mm-hmm.
mind-altering substances. And guess what? It's
It's
never enough.
temporary.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's temporary. It never lasts. We seek to find them in our own righteousness, right? In our own moral conduct, in our own sense of righteousness. And yet we are way too flawed to have that ever, exist for any length of time. It eventually falls apart. We continue going to these same wells, and it's never enough. And there's only one place you can satisfy non-biological cravings simultaneously, and that is in the non-biological. That is in connection with your maker. That's why I called the book The Magnetic Heart of God, Understanding the 5 Cravings of Your Soul, because I believe that God placed these cravings within us for the purpose of drawing us back to himself. And that is ultimately the only place we can have this satisfied. So for those who aren't currently people who subscribe to perhaps the Christian worldview or the Christian faith, I would offer this to them as something to consider. The whole world has been pursuing these cravings apart from God, and it has not worked, and it has never worked. We hear rumors sometimes, but they are only rumors. Think about this. I heard a interview with Elon Musk a couple of weeks ago, and the interviewer asked Elon Musk, who is the richest man who ever existed, as far as we know. The interviewer asked him, "What are you happy?" And Elon Musk sat there for a moment. You could tell he was processing the question, and then he said, I don't think many people would want to be me. And we just think, wow, here's a man who can at any time enjoy everything the world has to offer.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not enough. Not only that, I heard a quote a while ago by Jim Carrey, the Canadian comedian who's made all those silly movies, Dumb and Dumber.
Yeah, we love Jim Carrey.
Yeah, and Ace Ventura. I heard a quote from him a while ago, or he said, "I wish that everybody could experience riches and fame, so they would finally realize that that's not the answer."
Mm-hmm.
You will not find peace and happiness in biological things. God placed these cravings within you for the purpose of drawing us back to himself. So how do you come to Christ, as you put it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think the first part is to understand your need. Not just the need for forgiveness, we'll get to that, but an existential need to be connected with your maker. And then, of course, that would bring us to the traditional, perhaps Christian answer to say, our whole lives we have fought against this magnetic pull of God, and we have sought to satisfy these cravings in other places, which, by the way, is the definition of sin. That's when God says, this is where I've called you to find peace and happiness. And we say, you know what, I'm going to find it somewhere else. At the end of the day, that's the definition of sin. And that is what the serpent, tempted Adam and Eve with in the garden. And so we yield to the fact that we need something beyond what this world has to offer to have peace. Mm-hmm. We come to God and we confess that we have been stubbornly looking for satisfaction in all the wrong places. And then we put our faith and trust in him to forgive us for our foolish attempts to find satisfaction elsewhere. Mm-hmm. And then we trust his grace and goodness to wash over us, to then wash us away from that sin, so that we can then step into that creation-creator relationship with God. The sinner-savior relationship is a door through which we enter into the creation-creator relationship.
Nice. Ooh, you broke it down. Wow, that was good. That was like a roundabout, deep through, pinch to the side answer. Yeah, there was a lot of stuff oozing on that one. Nice. There's many layers to that.
Yeah, and I think it's important we do that, because the world and the church, for that matter, has become numb to the pat answer, you're a sinner and you need a savior.
Yes.
Now, ultimately, that is the truth, but that is the door through which we enter into the real thing, which is relationship and connection with our maker. And I think that the world has become deaf to that singular pat answer. And so I think, yes, we need to preach the gospel from a Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John perspective, but more and more we need to learn to preach the gospel from the Genesis perspective. You are a soul created in the image of God. That's where we need to start the conversation.
Wow, I like that. Because the latter is what we had grown up with, was the latter. So this new approach and new idea is nice. It's softer. It's a little bit more, it makes sense. And you explained it so well.
Yeah, I thank you. It is timeless truth that is packaged in a fresh way. And I have discovered that it helps people. It kind of lowers our defenses, and it allows us to think about it and mull it over and say, oh yeah, this makes sense to me now. As long as you're just pointing your finger and telling me I'm flawed, I put up my walls. Well, I often talk about craving for innocence, right? One of the irony of it is the reason a lot of people won't come to Christ is because of this realization that they have to confess that they're sinners. And what does that do? Well, that hurts us in the innocence button. So our very craving for innocence makes us want to run away from the gospel, makes us want to run away from Christ. And yet the irony is, at the end of the day, it's only in confessing our sins that we can be declared fully innocent.
Yes. This is it. Wow, I love it. Woo. I want to change a little bit, and I want to talk a little bit about forgiveness. I want you to explain to us, why is forgiveness important? What does it mean to us as a people? How does it help our soul? How does it help us?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think forgiveness is, for many of us, even though we don't, it is our secret weapon. Oftentimes what is standing between us, and that fulfillment or that peace or that calm spirit that we're seeking is in fact the ability to let go and forgive. Ultimately, forgiveness, in order for us to forgive, we have to let go of our offense. And that is something that is a process for a lot of people, a lot of us, and myself included, to be willing to let go of the offense. Now, the scripture puts this in a very beautiful way that some people may be ready to receive or not receive. And it says this: forgive as I have forgiven you, is what God says to us. Ultimately, we are God's kids, and like kids, we want to do what our dad does. When we're small, right? All of my children, when they were at a younger age, when you would ask, they're at that 6 to 12 age, and someone would ask them what they wanted to do when they grew up, they'd say they want to be a preacher. They want to do what their dad does. And I think there's a part of us in the scripture why does God call us to forgive? Why does God call us to love our enemies? Tough things like that. Why does he call us to pursue holiness? He calls us to do that because he's calling us to do what he does. He's calling us to imitate our Father. And so at the end, and there's been no one as mistreated and maligned and defamed as God himself. And yet he offers love and forgiveness to each of us.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I would say we forgive because we're doing what our dad does when we do it. But we also forgive because it releases us from the pain of offense. And there's a saying out there that has developed, and I don't want to step on any toes, but I'm just going to go out and come out and say it anyway.
Okay, bring it on.
Well, it's this idea that forgiveness does not mean forgetting. And I can.
Oh, okay, yes, people do say that.
Yeah, when I can understand the concept a little bit, but I think we need to be careful with that, because I think at the end of the day, forgiveness must. Mature forgiveness forgets. Let me put it that way. Perhaps
that was nicely put.
Immature or forgiveness in the developmental stage remembers,
of course,
and sometimes for good reason, to learn or to ensure that someone has in fact asked for forgiveness or has in fact brought restitution. But when forgiveness has reached full maturity, it does forget.
It does.
And that is very important. That doesn't just benefit the person who you are forgiving. That benefits you. Because, it's only when you have fully let go of something that you can be fully released from it.
Yes. So true, Cory. Give it to us. Yes. You hit it on the nail. You hit the nail on the hammer. I think the hammer would want to be the hammer.
I hope so. That's the only way the hammer is actually going to be happy.
Look, exactly. Do what it's supposed to do, for sure. Oh, nicely put. Very nicely put. You have a way with your words. So nice. I want to ask you, I had a question come in. Someone wanted to ask, what happens after we die? I felt you touched upon it, but I said that I would ask, so I don't want to be counted as a liar. So what happens after we die? And what's your understanding and interpretation of heaven?
Yeah. So as far as the first one goes, so I'm going to share this one, and I'm going to say that this is what I believe to be true based on my understanding of, to be frank, both science and biblical text.
Okay.
And yet at the same time, I think there is room for some variation in this, and it's not heretical to have some variation. However,
okay, so it's not locked into play.
Right. Yeah. But I would say that the best way to understand it would be, when we die, our non-biological self is released from our biological self And I think this is very true, actually. If for any of those out there who have ever been around, been with someone that passed away, or they came upon an accident, and they were unfortunate enough to witness, a deceased individual. Anyone who has been in that circumstances knows that it's what they know didn't happen is it wasn't like a biological switch simply flipped and our bodies turned off. We know that something has left.
Yes.
It is very obvious that what is left is a shell, that the soul has left. And so when we die, our soul, our non-biological self, departs from this biological self, right? And the scripture says to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord.
Present with the Lord, yes.
Yeah. And so I ultimately believe that is what takes place when we die. The thief hanging on the cross, right? What did Jesus say to him? He said, "Today you will be with me in paradise." Now, there are other places and other texts that some people seem to have the idea that there's some sort of waiting period for the soul, whether it's, Catholicism, which we'll talk about, a purgatory, or, and there's different kind of theories about that whole situation. I don't know. I would not say that I feel that is heretical. However, I think it is less consistent with the biblical text, in that I believe to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. So when we die, our souls are caught up and we are free from this biological, to a certain degree, shackle that has been holding us back, right? And we are with the Lord. And then how what proceeds from there, as far as, what is the progression of coming before the Lord and finding our names written in the book and all those things, right? I think that there's some room for some interpretation there, and I would never be so prideful as to say I have mapped all that out. But what I do believe,
honesty.
Yeah, I do believe when we die, our souls go to be with our Maker.
Go back to the Maker. Nice. Thank you, and thank you for your honesty with that. And this is it. If we don't know, it's all right to say we don't know in leadership positions, and feeling like I'm not really sure about this, or this is open to interpretation. So I really appreciate you being honest about that section of that. Be like, this is what I'm sure of, and the other can be taken by each individual and worked in its own way. Well, so thank you.
I appreciate that. And I think it's important that we actually do that. I would kind of question anyone who decided to like take a firm stance on something. For example, even in the Old, there's a lot of them out there, but even when you think of the Old Testament, when you think of the Old Testament prophets who prophesied the coming of the Messiah, if you actually go back into the text of Isaiah, or, the multiple places, obviously, the people who were there at the time would have been shocked to see how it actually turned out. Right? They were like, when you look at the biblical text and then see how it actually unfolded, when Christ came. Yeah. Looking back, we can say, oh, that makes sense. But the people who are alive at that time, that's why they were shocked, right? In the time of Jesus, they're like, what? Who's the Messiah? What's taking place? That's why they crucified him, because it did not match the old biblical text. So for us now to take that same stance, to me, would be just unnecessary and unfortunate, even in that regard. Now, regarding heaven, what is heaven? Well, ultimately, I'll go back to the cravings of the soul. Jesus said, I go to prepare a place for you. And the beauty of that statement is, listen to this, Chris. I don't believe he was just speaking generically. He was speaking specifically. Chris, he is gone to prepare a place for you. And the place that just as he created you unique to me, the place that he is creating for you is also unique from mine. And while it will be the same place, there will be a Chris twist to it. There will be a Cory twist to it. And the scripture is very, very clear that God will wipe every tear from our eye. There will be no sadness. There will be a place of joy. And why is that? Because our souls are finally, without the confines of this biological flesh, are finally in full connection with their Maker. And ultimately, that is the ultimate definition and joy of heaven. And that is ultimately also the the sadness and the tragedy of hell is, and that I often say the best way to understand hell is our 5 core humanities forever unfulfilled.
Ooh,
because they cannot
wow.
be connected with their maker. And
Never
so
getting peace.
It is never having peace, because you never have security, identity, independence, significance, or innocence.
Well, then that means
definition.
we're living in hell now. We're in hell on earth.
Well, to a certain degree, but
To a certain degree.
we have the opportunity now
Yes,
to live in
to be
connection
able
with
to.
him.
Yes, this
And
is
not
true.
only that, but God in his goodness and his grace has given us the reflection of those cravings in one another.
Mm.
So I often say this as an example. And I don't know if you are in a relationship or a marriage with someone, Chris, but
Oh no, I'm single happily.
okay, your spouse, the people out there who in their relationships, or your best friend or your boss, whatever it is, cannot be the source of the cravings for your soul. And that is to say,
no,
I'll just say for a wife, for a husband to place on their wife, or a wife to place on their husband, the burden of giving them security, identity, independence, significance, and innocence. It is a burden that we cannot bear. However, if you want to have a great relationship, you need to be someone who reflects the source to your spouse, to your significant other, in your workplace. And if you want a happy relationship, your spouse needs to see the reflection of security, identity, independence, significance, and innocence. And if they don't, they will have a hard time wanting to stay in that relationship.
So true.
And it's the same thing with work. I mean, even if you detach this from, like, if some of your listeners are like, okay, I like the concept, but I can't handle this whole religion thing. I would say if you go to your workplace and your workplace sees in your efforts security, identity, independence, significance, and innocence, you will thrive. They will promote you. You will climb the corporate ladder. However, if you threaten the company's security, identity, independence, significance, or innocence, you will either stay where you are or you will be out the door. And so it has application in absolutely every scenario in our life, because it is the core of who we are. And it's what we are all looking for. Why is there such a thing as Wall Street and the stock trade? Why is there such a thing as the Olympics? Why is there such a thing as mud wrestling? Right? Or even academia, right? It's everybody in pursuit of security, identity, independence, significance, and innocence. And these are the metrics which we have developed to try to keep score.
All right, Cory, give it to us. Woo! Oh, I'm excited to listen through this again. Nice. So good. So good. So fluid. Well, I like to close with this final question to all my guests. Is your glass half empty or half full?
Oh. You know what, Chris? I'm going to push back on you.
Go ahead and push. Go ahead, push.
I am going to say that my glass is full, as long as I allow my maker to pour into it. And then let me also step back on a psychological standpoint and ask you a question.
Okay, sure.
Is it better to have less negative thoughts or more positive thoughts?
Wow. I guess it depends on your view of that question. I would say have less negative thoughts.
You absolutely nailed it.
Okay, because if you don't have any negative thoughts, then the rest of them would be positive. Or something else.
From a psychological standpoint, or as a coach, as an example, like I'm a transformational coach. So if I'm coaching people on moving forward in life, it is vastly more beneficial to develop less negative thoughts than to add more positive ones. Now, obviously, both are good, right? But so when it comes to the glass, I just kind of thought of that because of the glass half full or half empty analogy scenario.
Yes.
I can kind of see a connection between those two things. But anyway, so in that point, I would say less negative is more valuable than trying to add more positive. Because with less negative, will come positivity in a more natural way.
Nice. Look at you. Yeah, I love this answer. You know, it's such a variety. People take a moment and they really come out with something. It's so great. So great. Thank you so much. So awesome. Do you have any final thoughts for our listeners? You
My
gave us
final
so
thought,
much, but it's something to wrap us up, Cory. Wrap us
sure.
up.
My final thoughts would be this to each of your listeners: you are more than the reflection in the mirror.
Mm.
You are more than the number on the weigh scale. You're more than the balance in your bank account or the diploma on your wall. You are a soul created to live in connection with the sovereign of the universe.
Mm.
And when we truly embrace that fact, that actuality, that reality, it changes everything. And your task is to hold on to that reality with all that you have. And to me, that is the difference between what I would fear for your listeners is that they may listen to this podcast and they may gain revelation, but not partner that with wisdom. See, knowledge ultimately is revelation, right? When you gain knowledge, you have a revelation about something. You know, it is revealed to you. I now understand.
That aha moment. Yes.
Yeah, I understand plant life now, right? I have knowledge about it. I understand, ocean life or whatever it is. So knowledge is revelation, but wisdom is now applying that knowledge in a practical and beneficial way. So as an example, a knowledgeable person will look at the sky and say, oh, I understand how clouds work. I understand with the color of the clouds and the way the birds are flying that it's going to be a rainy, windy day tomorrow. But the wise person will then bring in the lawn furniture and prepare for the windy day. And so my point being this, what I would not want your listeners to do is hear this message of the soul, to gain this revelation of what their soul is looking for, but then not do anything about it. So what we can do, and Chris, what you can do in your podcast is you can help educate people, help bring them knowledge. But ultimately, what we each need to do is then apply that knowledge. And that is what I hope most for your listeners. So when I say you are more than the reflection in the mirror, you are more than the number on the weigh scale, more than the balance in your bank account, more than the diploma on your wall. My hope and my prayer is that your listeners will have that revelation, gain that knowledge, and now begin to live differently because of it.
Yes. Put it into action.
Yeah.
Nice, Cory. Woo! You set us on fire today in the afternoon here in Tokyo. Yes. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for all your information, your breakdown about your book. All of this will be listed so people can go. And if they want to find out more about you, Cory, how do we do it? Tell us, what do we need to do?
The simplest way is to go to my website, CoryRosenke.com. That would be the centralized location where you can learn more about me. You can find some more resources. I have,
and that's all one word.
Yep.
All one word.
CoryRosenke.com. Yeah, all one word. And I have a few links to my book, though. But the truth of the matter is, in Tokyo, probably the best thing to do is just to search The Magnetic Heart of God, and it'll pop up at a store near you. And of course, you could be welcome to check out my social media sites, Cory Rosenke Ministries on Facebook, or just C Rosenke on Twitter.
Excellent. And all of this information will be listed when the episode is put out, so people will be able to find that information there as well.
Wonderful.
Thank you
this has
so
been a lot
much.
of fun, Chris. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you as well for taking some time out. We really appreciate you being a guest here on Glass Half Full. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thanks again.
Well, we want to wish you a good and relaxing evening, and we'll be in touch real soon.
Thank you, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you. And thank you to all the listeners here at Glass Half Full. Thank you for tuning in to another inspiring episode of our podcast. I'm your host, Chris Levins, and I want to express my gratitude to each and every one of you for being a part of our supportive community. Remember, Glass Half Full is not just a podcast. It's a safe platform for everyone to share their life experiences. Your stories and voices matter, and we appreciate you being here with us. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to stay updated with our future content, please subscribe, follow, and rate our podcast on Apple Music, Spotify, and YouTube.
Your support means the world to us, and it helps us reach even more listeners who can benefit from these valuable life experiences. As we wrap up this episode, always keep in mind, you are blessed. No matter the challenges you face, there's a reservoir of strength within you. Until next time, stay positive. And remember, the glass is always half full. See ya!